Yo, this is Lindsay coming at you from Streets 101 France edition. We're going to be telling you about the French Revolution and the events leading up to it. Before we go further in the French Revolution, we got to know more about the ruler. You know what I'm saying? You know, Louis XVI was ruling, but I got to kick it over to Maddie. She's going to tell you more about it.
Thanks, Edrat. I'm going to be telling you about Louis XVI and his reign as a king. He reigned from 1774 to 1791. He married an Austrian Archduchess Marie Antoinette through an arranged marriage at the age of 15. He was a cruel ruler. He was weak, indecisive man who made poor decisions as a leader. His horrible reign as a king led us to all the French Revolution. He did not care about us or his subjects at all. He let them starve and forced poor peasants to pay taxes. And if they refused to pay, he just killed them all. Back to you, Edrat.
Now that you know about our crappy ruler Louis XVI, you got to know about 3 states. We're going to tell you a little about that too.
Alright, there were 3 estates in France. There was the first estate, which was made up mainly of the clergy. It made up about 1% of the population. The second estate was made up of some clergy mixed in with some nobles, and this made up about 2% of the population. And these 2 estates, they didn't have to pay taxes. They didn't really have to do anything because they were considered the nobility of France. They didn't really, they didn't do anything. The third estate, however, made up 97% of the population, and this was like your middle class, your peasants, your workers, your artisans, all those people. They made up 97% of the population, and they had to do everything. They had to pay taxes, they did all that stuff, and they were hammered by the government. Now, since you had these poor people paying the taxes, which they couldn't really even pay, Louis, this guy, he started to run out of money. He ran out of money. He was like broke for a little bit. So he was forced to call a national assembly to discuss these problems. And during this national assembly, he wanted to pass some laws, one of which was he wanted to make the first and second estates pay taxes. Now, the third estate, they were all for it. Like, they were for it, because that means they wouldn't have to pay as many taxes. But the first and second estate, they were like, psh, heck no, I'm not paying taxes. I'm nobility. I ain't gonna pay no taxes. So that kind of made the third estate really, really mad. And because the second and first estate paired together, they kind of overruled the third estate because they did it by votes. Everybody kind of got a vote. So that was 2 votes for not having that law and 1 vote for having the law. So because of this, the tennis court oath happened. The third estate basically they left that meeting and they went and they found a different spot to make a constitution because they were mad and they wanted to reform everything about the government. June 17th, 1789 was when the people revolted against the king, clergy, and noblemen. This revolt was named the National Assembly, which I already went over. Louis was the king at the time of the tennis court oath. The people planned to meet up at the morning of the 17th, but the meeting hall was locked down and surrounded. So they decided to go to the nearest tennis court. From that day on, king and clergymen and the noble people agreed that they would not let the National Assembly have more power and freedom. June 20th, 1789, the French people got together and signed a petition. It said to never separate unless the government had been set up. So basically, they got in that tennis court, they locked themselves in, and they said, we're not going to leave until we form a new constitution. They formed it, and they left, and this was the first kind of act of the revolution.
Not only was the National Assembly the first celebrated act, but also changed France's government in these type of ways. It ended absolute monarchy, which was great for the people. It is the beginning of representative government. It passed laws and reforms in the name of the French people, and it drew up a new constitution. If you ask for my opinion, I personally thought this was great for all the people. They were happy, this is what they all wanted, and they made this change.
Now that we know more about the National Assembly and the events leading up to the French Revolution, we're going to start looking at this as an investigation. Who was involved? What were the causes? How did it transform French society? Was the death of a king necessary for the birth of a republic? Let's start at the storming of Bastille.
All right. The The storming of Bastille was when all the French commoners showed their hatred towards Louis XVI, raided the French prison Bastille. And out of this, they killed several guards and put their heads on sticks and paraded around the town. This became a national symbol of France and is now celebrated as July 4th is in the U.S.
So wouldn't it be crazy if people run around with heads on sticks? You know, all I'm saying is the National Assembly, it led to all the deliberate and symbolic acts of the Revolution, the tennis court oath, and the storming of Bastille. Now we're going to talk about something real crazy, the Great Fear.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the Great Fear. And basically what the Great Fear was is the people or the citizens, they kind of started to see troops going in and out of places, and they kind of started to hear rumors about the king and some of the nobles, and so they kind of got scared. So they went and they started gathering even more weapons than they already had, and kind of everybody became armed at this point, and they kind of started to burn down and kind of like knock down and like just destroy things of the nobles. And basically nothing of the nobles was left. They just kind of destroyed all of it. And this led to the March on Versailles.
I'm going to tell you about the March on Versailles. So the March on Versailles was mostly caused by the rise of price in flour because it had to do with the French staple diet, and that was bread. Bread had to have flour. So all the mean ladies that were strong and big and were bringing in the fish to go with that bread were so upset because they needed their bread to go to all their families, and all the commoners were struggling because of it. So they raided the castle and they took all of their food and their bread. And the king and queen were so afraid that they were going to mar all the other people, including the guards and including themselves, that they made them flee to Paris. They were so scared.
So let's discuss Louis's death. Basically what happened was he was held captive in Paris by the citizens, the people that were, mad at him. And Austria sent kind of a letter to Paris saying, if you do any harm to the royal family, we are going to destroy Paris. And Paris, or the people of Paris were already kind of mad at Louis because he kind of tried to escape. So they accused him for treason, and they found him guilty. And after Paris kind of sent in that little letter saying, if you do any harm to the royal family, we will destroy Paris, they're like, you know what the heck? We're going to kill you. And they sentenced him to death. They sentenced King Louis to death on January 21st, 1793. This is how he died right here. He got his head chopped off. And this influenced the revolution because it showed that if they stood up for what they believed in, they could achieve basically anything, because they did kill the king, so that's definitely achieving something. So it just kind of showed them what they could accomplish.
Now, when Louis XVI got guillotined, the Reign of Terror began with Robespierre. Now, all the French people were guillotining basically everybody who were against the revolutionary people. They all wanted a new government, and if you slightly disbelieved in the revolution, then you were beheaded. The aftermath of this Reign of Terror eventually ended in Robespierre actually being beheaded, with 2 kings having to die for a republic. The National Convention was the one who really turned on them. The French public opinion shifted dramatically. Everyone was weary of the terror, although they were the ones who started it. They were tired of all the sky-high prices on staple foods, which is the reason why the March on Versailles even happened. The National Convention also drafted a new plan for the government again. They split into the House of Legislature. There was a directory, which was an executive body of 5 men, and although some were corrupt moderates, they gave a period of order, and that's what the people wanted. So they came up with a general to rule their armies, to go against all the people going against the revolutionary acts. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte.
Now let's look back at our big picture questions. What were the causes? Who was involved? Did it change French society? Was the death of a king necessary?
Wrapping things up, what were the causes? You got the National Assembly, the tennis court oath, the storming of Bastille, the March on Versailles. What about suspects that provoked the revolution? You got King Louis, Marie Antoinette, Robespierre, and the French people. How did it change and transform French society? Well, it formed a new constitution. It got rid of absolute monarchy, and it showed the French people what they were capable of through violence and kind of going through with what they believed in.
And was the death of a king necessary?
What about Lindsay? Do you think it was necessary for a king to be killed?
Yeah, I do think it was necessary. I think chaos was necessary for a republic to be born.
From my perspective, throughout all the things we have been taught and through all the research, I thought this was totally necessary for the king to die.
Concluding our series of investigation, who was responsible for the French Revolution?
The poor French government.
The French people wanting a change.
And terrible rulers like Louis XVI and Robespierre.